You ever find yourself sitting in class and think, when am I ever going to use this? Well, in IB psychology, you won't, because we are studying how and why we think and act the way we do, and what's more relevant and important than that. Welcome to the wonderful world of IB psychology. If you're considering taking this for a subject, I'm going to explain the whole course in less than 10 minutes so you can make an informed decision. If you're just about to start the course, then again, I'll give you the nice overview so you know what to expect and how to do well. And maybe you've already started the course. This will give you a nice refresher and could even help you see the bigger picture, which will help you get ready for your exams. Psychology is the scientific study of behavior and cognition. How and why do we think and act the way we do? So IB psychology tries to answer that question by looking at three particular explanations. The biological approach looks at biological factors, what's happening in our brain, our hormones, and our genetics to understand behavior. Now, I like to teach this approach using criminology as my theme. So we look at the biological basis of criminal behavior. Are there biological factors that might increase the likelihood someone's going to become a criminal, like abnormalities in their brain or their hormone levels or their particular genetics? There is, it's called the warrior gene, which might make someone more violent. The sociocultural approach looks at external, environmental, social, and cultural factors that can explain behavior. For example, one of the most common behaviors social psychologists try to understand is prejudice and discrimination. Why do people treat others so horrendously if they belong to a different group? Is that based on being raised by our parents, how we're raised, or learning from our parents and our friends in our school, or maybe things we get from the media? Is it to do with the groups that we belong to? Is this why people become prejudiced and discriminate? And so we try to understand behaviors from that social cultural perspective. Now, the cognitive approach, it's a little bit misnamed. It's called the cognitive approach to understanding behavior and cognition, but really it's the cognitive approach to understanding cognition. It's a deeper look into the mental thinking aspect of psychology. So two important processes are memory and decision making. And so I'm working on a new unit now called How to Learn, right? And so we can use this psychological science of learning and memory to our advantage to figure out how to become better learners. What more important thing to learn about in school? And we can look at a range of factors that might affect our learning, right? Like how we remember or rehearse, how we think, and also factors like emotion. Now, in decision making, we study how do we make good decisions and what can affect that decision-making process and the biases in our decision-making, like confirmation bias. Now, for each of these three approaches, high-level students have an additional extension topic. That's one way HL and SL differ. In the biological approach, you'll go deeper into animal research and how and why animals are used in psychology. In the cognitive approach, you'll look at the effects of technology on cognition particularly, and I like to teach that in a unit I call Studying with Your Smartphone, which is all about the pros and cons of using smartphone and computer technology to try to study. And the social cultural approach is globalization, the process of cultures becoming more alike through trade and immigration and the exchange of ideas. Very relevant in today's modern world. So that's the core. Now we get to the options. And so while the core gives us those three explanations for behavior and cognition, the options really provides us with the particular behaviors to focus on, and then we choose which variables we use to explain them. So for example, we have in order of popularity, abnormal psychology, human relationships, health psychology, and developmental psychology. In abnormal psychology, you'll learn about psychological disorders. How do we diagnose them? How do we explain them? How do we treat them? And so psychological disorders you might study are things like PTSD or depression, phobias, anxiety. I used to like to teach about post-traumatic stress disorder because there's a lot of relevant information there about stress, but I'm working on a new unit called depression, and it's called the rise in teenage depression. Because since 2010, it's been a steep rise in the rates of anxiety and depression, particularly in teenagers. And so I think it's really valuable to explore why that is. Then we have human relationships. Now this is divided into three particular topics: social responsibility, group dynamics, and personal relationships. My favorite is personal relationships. I teach that in a unit called Love and Marriage. It's all about why do we fall in love, who do we find attractive and why, how do we stay in love or stay married, and then why do couples break up and get divorced. Social responsibility is about how and why we might help each other or why we don't help each other in need. And group dynamics is more about prejudice, discrimination, conflicts between groups. Health psychology is similar to abnormal psychology in that you're going to understand the explanations of a health problem, what factors can make us healthy or unhealthy, and then how do we promote and improve people's health. So I've just finished materials on stress and how to cope with stress. What else could be more relevant for IB students than learning about stress, where it comes from, and how to cope? Other problems you might study are obesity or addiction or sexual health. Developmental psychology is all about the factors that influence our development as we're growing up. So what's happening between the ages of early childhood from 0 years old to our adolescence, which ends in our early 20s. So what factors there are influencing our development in that important time? This is probably the least popular of the options, not because it's not as interesting, but I think the way it's structured in the guide, it makes it a little tricky to prepare for the exams. That's not to say you can't do excellently in the exams with this option, but I like to take some of the topics here and spread them out in other parts of the course so we can get the most interesting stuff without having to choose it as a whole separate approach. Now, the topic that runs right the way through the course is research methodology. If the key question in psychology is how and why do we think and act the way we do, well, then the research methods is about how do we know. And how we know in psychology is through the research. But we have to be able to critically evaluate and analyze the methods used to figure out, is that knowledge valid and useful and will be reliable? And we also have to couple that with ethical issues. You might be familiar with some of the really famous psychological studies that do a lot of psychological harm and damage, and even modern animal studies. We can argue, is that right? Is that ethical to try to gain knowledge about humans by causing harm and suffering to others? And so it's a really important question to address. So for every topic in the core and options, we have to figure out and understand the methods and the ethics. But for high-level students, you'll be assessed in that in paper 3. So that covers the external assessment. The internal assessment is your chance to conduct your own psychological experiment. So you'll work in a group of 2 to 4 students. You'll select a study to replicate, base it on an existing theory, and then you're going to run your psychology experiment, gather the data, analyze the data, write up a report, draw some conclusions, run some statistical tests, and see if your results can tell us something about human behavior. And then we have it, the whole course. We've got the core, the options, research methods, and the internal assessment. Why study psychology? You ever find yourself sitting in class and think, when am I ever going to use this? Well, in IB psychology, you won't, because we are studying how and why we think and act the way we do, and what's more relevant and important than that? Just take studying with your smartphone. How that affects our mind, our ability to focus and concentrate. When are you going to use that? Every day you're going to use that. Thinking about health and stress, how to cope with stress. Same thing with relationships, how to improve relationships, how do we use communication effectively in relationships. How does your belonging to groups influence your relationships with people around you and how you treat other people? All of this is so relevant in a day-to-day setting, which is why psychology is such a great subject to learn about. My best advice for doing well in IB psychology is many a little makes a mickle. Mickle is a big amount. Those that do well are those that do a little bit often throughout the whole duration of the course. I'm going to try to show you my YouTube stats from like the week leading up to the exams, and it's like everyone's watching these videos at the last minute, and I get it because I'm a psychology teacher, so I know how people work and how and why they think and act and procrastinate. But it's really important that if you want to do well, that's not the approach to take. That would be like me entering the Mr. Universe, not that that's going to happen, but thinking, all right, I'm going to look like Arnie, do nothing, and then the day before the competition, go to the gym for 5 hours and lift a bunch of weights. It's not going to make a difference. That's not how your brain works. That's not how learning works. That's not the psychology of studying. So my best advice is just do a little bit often. And another really important psychological tip, the secret to success is delaying gratification. If you can delay instant gratification and wait till later on, you're going to be more successful in life. And you might learn about some studies that explore that in this course. How that's relevant here is, we're constantly surrounded by things that could stimulate us and just detract us and entertain us. We have to be able to switch that off and go, right, I've got a goal here. I want to get a 7 in IB psychology. So I'm not going to spend my time on social media, or I'm going to limit it. And I'm going to make sure that I can take good care of my health and my brain and my ability to focus. And yeah, I'm going to spend time and socialize with my friends, but I've got to balance that with my other priorities. And so if you want to do well, it might be about setting goals and delaying and removing those instant sources of gratification around you to figure out and look more long-term for the rewards that are going to come later on. If you just want to enjoy psychology, that's easy. Just show up, open the book, listen to your teacher, and you'll have a great time. All right, that was it. I hope that was helpful. I'm trying to get all of my psychology content up onto YouTube, so it's coming in book form and blog form and videos, and so it's accessible in a range of different formats. So don't forget, hit subscribe if you'd like to see notifications of the new videos I'm making. And if you've got a request for something for me to make, please leave a comment, or if this was helpful, leave a comment as well. All right, if you're thinking about psychology, I hope you take it, and if you've already started, good luck, and let me know how I can help. Cheers, bye.